what the nature of the attack is. As far as the policy of dealing with it once it's put in a cybercrime area versus a cyber warfare or nation-state action, and there's obviously many gradations of nation-state action well short of war. As far as those policy goes, that's been highly variable. It depends on the administration in charge, what's happened in the past, and sometimes even the circumstances and composition of the members of certain committees as to what we're allowed to do, and go forth from there.
Okay. So. Robert, based on your Secret Service background, say you're the criminal investigator and you're looking into this. Initially, the thought is that it is a crime, but as an investigator starts to dig into it, starts to look at other machines that might be tied to that particular criminal investigation, you start to think, okay, maybe it's a national security issue. Can you kind of walk us through that process of, what are some of the transitions and the thought processes that go into that?
Well, the agents in San Francisco, we started the Electronic Crimes Task Force, 2001, December 2001. And the whole focus there was to collaborate with the industry and government, academia, venture capital. And they quickly developed these trust-based relationships with the industry, because the industry at the time really was not calling the FBI or Secret Service. And the advent of InfraGard and these task forces allowed them to see a lot more of the criminal activity. And every once in a while, they would bleed over into potentially national security related issue or terrorism. And the difference between the FBI and Secret Service in terms of who has what responsibilities is if there has even a hint of terrorism to it, then the Federal Bureau of Investigations would take control. So we would defer that type of information to them. And over the years, we have been stovepiped. I still stay in touch with my colleagues, but the relationships are getting better. And as General Hayden said, the information sharing is continuing to improve, although not perfect. So we defer to the subject matter experts on that.
Okay. So let's just say this thing's been bubbling. U.S. CERT, law enforcement, DOD, all these different organizations have been working on this particular problem. And they're now starting to believe, okay, maybe this is related to, cyber espionage or related to a nation state. How does that information, once this is all put together, it rises through the executives and it lands at the White House? Melissa, can you kind of walk us through what happens once something like that's presented to maybe the National Security Council or whether it's the Homeland Security Council? As it bubbles up from, the agencies are starting to believe, all right, there's a lot of different moving parts, a lot of different government agencies are involved. Who kind of takes charge and helps coordinate across all the different agencies?
Well, the White House doesn't get operational. It only comes down to if there's a problem from a policy perspective or a legal perspective that the White House would get involved into a day-to-day incident. However, when there are issues that are cutting across multiple areas, the FBI or Secret Service sees one particular thing, U.S. CERT sees a second or third area, NSA sees a fourth, but they're all connected. Sometimes the only way that connecting the dots comes together is in an interagency meeting where everybody's sharing the data. That's starting to change, though, from an operational perspective as more and more of our centers are connected together and linking the data and getting to common visualization. And that was one of the most important initiatives out of the Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative. And it was Initiative 5, Connect the Centers. And that was connecting U.S. CERT with the National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force, which is where all law enforcement comes together, with the Defense Cybercrime Center and the Joint Task Force for Global Network Operations, which was DOD, and NSA's Threat Operations Center. I think I got all 6. And the National Incident Response Center, which is all the intelligence community's networks. And so as you bring those 6 centers together, you start to get to more of a common operational picture, and you get to a better warning understanding if there's incidents happening in all of these different domains. You need to be able to connect the dots. And previous to CNCI, there wasn't very much information sharing. It was more ad hoc relationship based, and now it's becoming much more formal, and there's an infrastructure around it to support that understanding.
Okay. What I'd like to do is we're going to go right down the panel, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. But I'd be interested in each one of your opinions on, if you're at the table making the decision, what would rise to the occasion of that you say, hey, you know what, this is an act of war from country X. You know, we believe that the cyber attack rise to the occasion, or you can simply say, you know, I don't think we're quite there yet. But I'd be interested in opinions right down the audience, starting with Mike for the panel.
Well, of course, being a military officer, one of the first things that we pay attention to, of course, is Geneva Convention's law of, law of armed conflict, and particularly the element that comes to mind when you say that is the business of proportionality. So we are required to respond in a proportional manner if we respond. So this idea of an overwhelming force is something that's far beyond what was done to whatever entity it might be, would not be out of the would be out of the question. We would want to respond proportionally. Having said that, I think there are many ways to respond. It doesn't always require an attack, you know, cleared by the National Command Authority to go back, a counterattack, the idea of deterrence, to strike and counterstrike, like in the nuclear days. But rather, sometimes there's more subtle ways of defending. The release of critical algorithms critical to the defense and detection of malware, and the sandboxing of malware and those things, or the making of malware inert through these methodologies, sometimes which is closely held within our government and our confines. Perhaps that would be a course of action that we get with major antivirus vendors, and we get those sorts of things embedded in certain products, or we get them out to say U.S. companies that have been attacked. I believe that sort of thing's important, and I also think that maybe we need to have a debate short of any sort of major incident about what sorts of that kind of intellectual property that the government holds should or shouldn't be made available even now, to kind of cut down on the relative noise level on the network.
Building on Mike's comments, I think that the United States has not defined what is an act of armed aggression in cyberspace, period. And until you start to understand what is a common infrastructure and what is a sovereign infrastructure and what those thresholds may be, you will not be able to get to the discussion around warfare. I think also as you start to enter into this particular conversation, and there's been a lot of it in the United States, especially with the stand-up of Cyber Command, is that if an attack were going to be launched, it's likely going to come from a U.S. infrastructure. And if you think about all of the compromised networks and infrastructures already in the United States and how the botnets are being used, and that we are, in many ways, the Fatah of cybercrime already because of the way that our infrastructure is, that likely that proportionality will be against our own infrastructure. And if that's the case, then you have to rethink warfare in this overall interconnected domain.
Thanks. I think Melissa actually must have read my notes because she paved the road for me nicely. I wanted to kind of change up the form a little bit and just kind of put this out there. I believe in a totally different perspective on approaching this problem. I'll use a 30-second historical anecdote. Many of you in here were in Vietnam. I was not. And history tells us how General Giap maybe embraced a truly irregular warfare unconventional approach, similar to the Chinese game of Go, where General Westmoreland was a more traditional, conventional infantryman, brute force type engagement. I find myself in Fallujah a couple years ago. We have tanks rolling down these little tiny alleyways, and I have people that are shooting at me in civilian clothes from buildings that I can't find. Eerily similar. So I think as we look at this problem, not just in terms of response, and I am moving to answer the question, I think our perspective needs to take into consideration that we're in an environment where there is no definition of boundary, of identity, of responsibility, of accountability. And I think that in the case of the Fallujah example I gave, I think our .mils and our .govs is the tank going down the alley, and I think our .coms is everybody else. And I think when we build a policy or strategy, if we're going to have to build a castle, because we will, around those things that stick out like a .mil or a .gov, then we need to prepare to fortify that, but we also need to give appreciation to ambiguity, give appreciation to not being obvious. I think that not only has that helped us, and I know from, I regularly work with Special Operations Command and some other entities, I know that that is how we do operations, and that has given us a lot of success. General McChrystal really put the road forward in doing this, and we've seen a lot of response in the physical execution of those strategies, and I think we could see some similar gains in the cyberspace. So as we consider policy and as we consider authorities, consider another perspective, that perspective of not J-damming servers, but maybe, as Mike said, maybe it's a more deliberate strategy. Maybe it's sort of a reputation denigration. Maybe it's inducing uncertainty into the cyber lexicon, much like they did with To Catch a Child Predator, where people don't even feel comfortable organizing inside cyber. So, kind of a long answer. My response, well, if that were to occur, hopefully by then, there would be sort of digital version of SETI, or citizen soldiers that could, in their free time, participate, crowdsource. I do agree with Melissa. I think we would have to, based on the level of attack that we received, would in some regards shape our response and scope. But I think a lot of things that need to be considered is the prevention of such attack. And I know we didn't talk about deterrence much, but I think a different perspective from our government would afford us major leverage on the deterrence side, so that people may think less of going after those castles and coming after our infrastructure.
I'm going to be the curmudgeon at large here, which is my comfortable role. We have three choices. We can make things happen, we can watch things happen, and we can wonder what happened. So I'm going to issue a policy challenge to you. Let's don't get distracted by the 1,000 points of illumination, because they don't put much light onto the subject. Sometimes we overanalyze, and in the process of overanalyzing, we get wound around the axle and we don't make any progress. Let's make our systems more resilient and less likely, less attractive to be exploited by an adversary. And one of the best ways to do that, and I'm inviting you to participate in a policy formulation. This is a live exercise. Get involved. The American public spends more money on astrology than the American government spends on basic R&D for cybersecurity. We need to change that. We need to change that. Because if we don't, reading a horoscope is not going to give you much of a future. Now, some of the paths you can go, write your members of Congress, send them emails, tell them you want more money spent on research and development for cybersecurity. Encourage small cap companies. Help create an environment where a small cap company, a small capitalized company, can develop cutting edge technology. The leading edge technology is not always developed in the large corporations. It's in someone's garage or backyard or basement. Help make a change in that particular area, and it will make a difference. Now, I say this for a couple of reasons. One, part of my areas of responsibility is research and innovation. And one of the individuals that I deal very